A comprehensive study of the budget of over 400 American cities over the last 5 years shows that despite persistent efforts by politicians, pundits, and police unions to tie rising crime to dwindling police power, there has been no mass defunding of the police. According to the Real News Network, police budgets grew or shrank in proportion to overall city budgets in the last 5 years. In the end, police departments got the same average cut of the city budget in 2021 as they did in previous years, around 29%.
Meanwhile, a newly released survey from Pew Research asked Black Americans to identify the most important issues in their community. Their top answer was violence or crime, with 17% of respondents listing drug activity, shootings, theft, or simply violence or crime. Other top issues included housing at 7%, COVID-19 and public health at 6%, infrastructure at 5%, neighbors at 4%, the availability of public safety and emergency services at 3%, differences among neighbors due to racism, diversity, or culture at 3%, and employment and wages 3%. So we've got a lot to get into here. Joining now is our rising panel. Olayemi Olurin is a New York City public defender for legal aid, and Darvio Morrow is CEO of FCB Radio Network and co-host of the Outlaws radio show. Welcome to both of you.
Morning.
So, Darvio, it looks like from reading that, a lot of those concerns, to the extent that crime is something Black Americans are very worried about, does that present an opening for the party, which is frankly the Republican Party, that talks much more about, solving crime than I think the Democratic Party does?
It does present an opening for them if they're smart enough to take it. And that's been part of the issue. I think it's not in the best interest of Black people to not have both parties competing for our vote, because you end up in a situation where one party takes you for granted and the other one ignores you. So I do think that it would be in our best interest and their best interest politically to try to compete for our votes. I'm just not sure if they're smart enough to do it.
Olayemi, do you think that the conservatives' approach to solving crime is effective?
No. And I was going to say that I disagree with the characterization that Republicans care more about solving crime. Republicans care more about a police state, perhaps, and reasonable minds can disagree on how to prevent crime. I think it's interesting to see this study presented as this kind of gotcha that, okay, Black people either don't have a problem with racism or that by having a problem with crime, that we would be in support of a police state, and that's not the case. I think what we're seeing is that we actually want to address the root causes of crime, which is why, not coincidentally, every single thing listed underneath violence and crime as the issues in our community are all things that impact crime, right? Economic issues, lack of housing, education, everything that's listed as issues are actually root causes of crime. So I don't think it really has anything to do with Republicans caring more about preventing crime and everything to do with this being used as an opportunity to endorse a police state.
Well, last week's shooting in Brooklyn, New York, has led Mayor Eric Adams to consider installing metal detectors in subway stations. According to Gothamist, Adams said his office is currently researching manufacturers and did not offer a timeline on their implementation. I'm a major critic of that. I think we talked about this last week. I don't understand how this would be possibly feasible or do any good. Olayemi, is this is he actually considering this, or is this just to keep the press busy or something?
You know what's funny? When we talked about it last week and we were all in consensus that this was ridiculous, in the back of my mind, I was like, all right, Adams probably has no intention of doing this or taking this seriously. This is probably something that was just thrown out. And then when he was criticized for even suggesting metal detectors, his response in the media was that the rest of us rushed to criticize him, and it was a question he was asked. He downplayed it as though there was no way he was taking it seriously. But turns out now he says he's weighing which technology. He says he's looking at 3 different kinds of technology for the metal detectors and getting help from experts to determine where he wants to put them. So it turns out this absolutely stupid, not feasible, do nothing to help crime idea is something he plans to put into motion. Stupid.
Well, Darvio, this is the question. Is this emblematic of the kind of a tough on crime, conservative approach to crime that we should be having more of? Do you think there's an appetite for this among some communities, even if logistically, technically, it seems very unfeasible if you just take a look at what the commuter traffic is like in New York and then compare it to how effectively, the airlines are able to get people through check-in?
Well, I'm not from New York, but when I first heard this story, it seemed kind of unfeasible to me too. I was just Statistically, how would you make that work? But I think part of the problem is we end up in this binary conversation when it comes to crime, that either it's back the blue no matter who, or only address the root causes. When you really, in my mind, you really have to do both. We've talked about this here before. Like, you addressing the root causes is important, but you have to stop the literal and figurative bleeding first.
So how do you do that, Darvio? Because part of the statistics that we read up at the top was that the police budgets haven't changed. So some of the conservative narrative is because of defunding the police, because police don't have enough money, crime has gone up. But when you look at the fact that police budgets have remained stagnant and uncorrelated with the rate of crime over not just the last 5 years, but basically since time immemorial, how do you make an argument for the main conservative take, which is that the way to stop the bleeding, as it were, is simply to fund more police and put more police on the street, which of course was Eric Adams' other response to the shooting last week?
Well, again, I believe that you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So I've never gotten here or any platform and said that that is the be all end all. I do believe it's part of it. I can't speak for what's going on in the rest of the country, but I know here in Cleveland, we've several $1 million of the police budget has been removed from last year to this year. I know here we're down 200 cops and we're losing 20 to 30 more every month due to either retirements or resignations, and we're not replacing it. So I know what's going on here, but I do believe that you have to do both. So it's not just just put more police on the street and that's it, or just address the root causes and that's it. I've always believed that you have to do both.
So Olayemi, what do you say to that? Because again, the idea is that even if police numbers go up and down according to budgets, because of COVID, a lot of city budgets have been cut. General funding is down. People don't have as much money to go around, and other social programs have been cut as well, per the stats at the beginning. What do you make of this persistent idea that more police on the ground have a correlation to lowering crime rates?
Well, it's a myth, and it's a myth that's already been dispelled. I think we need to stop calling it tough on crime and call it ineffective on crime, because that's what it really is. It's not the Republicans, or let's not even make it a Republican versus Democrat thing, because if we're looking at New York City, our mayor, Eric Adams, is a Democrat, and he has all of the same tough on crime policies and belief systems as you would see on the right? So it's not a blue versus red issue. It's a matter of who is committed to endorsing a police state and who is not. But here's the reality. We talked about earlier the fact that police have not been defunded. Police have not lost money countrywide. And certainly, I can't speak to Cleveland, but I could speak to New York. Not only do we have a $10.4 billion budget for the NYPD, they got a $200 million increase. 1,000 new officers were hired, and we have over 35,000 officers in the force. So it's not a lack of funding. It's not a lack of officers. And this is the thing. America has the largest prison industrial complex in the world. We spend more money on policing, more money on arresting people, and more money incarcerating people than anywhere else in the world. And yet we are not the safest. We constantly complain about rising crime, and that is what we're dealing with. According to them, crime is rising in New York City, and the money that we've given NYPD has risen. The amount of officers we have has risen. So then what is the disconnect? Obviously, there must be one, right? So I would say that this really has nothing to do with, having more officers or anything like this. And it has nothing to do with framing this as a tough on crime issue, because it's simply where we want to put our money.
I agree in part, and I disagree in part. Yes, I think there's enough money and there's enough literal police. I think it's a matter of priorities. I mean, if you're spending the money, if you're using the police to, I don't know, bang down people's doors in the middle of the night to arrest them for growing their own marijuana or something, then that's not going to contribute meaningfully to any sort of decline of crime. On the other hand, if you do have more police walking the streets, you're going to have fewer stabbings and carjackings and things of that nature. Right? What's your sense of this, Darvio? I think you would. The literature on that, the evidence of that seems pretty clear to me that if you have many more police wandering the street, you're going to have fewer carjackings, fewer stabbings, fewer.
Every area that's designated a high crime area, all of the black neighborhoods, everywhere that they're designated high crime areas are filled with police. They have the highest police presence of anywhere else. So how come that's where the crime is happening? You say if we have police presence, we're going to see less stabbings, we're going to see less crime. We just had a shooting last week. We have 3,500 officers in the subways. There were officers in the platform when it happened. It happened nonetheless. We complain about crime increasing in the subway stations every week. That's where we see the highest police presence. We complain about it in certain neighborhoods. We have the highest police presence there. So then why?
Yeah, and the security cameras to that end, which were also supposed to be administered by the police department, weren't working. It felt like every part of the system was broken, and ultimately the suspect was spotted and turned in not by the police department but by a civilian who spotted him on the street.
Exactly.
So it does really, I think, call into question this myth, as Ole puts it, about the effectiveness of people on the street. Also on my radar next week, I will say that this huge chunk, the big bulk of the police department budget is going to funding patrol officers. That's the most expensive part of the budget. It doesn't seem to be paying off.
What do you think about this, Darvio? We'll give you the last word.
Yeah, so I think part of the issue, it all depends on how we define police presence, right? Like if you're in the community, in the car, driving past, like to me, that's not really necessarily police presence. I think we do need to go back to more of community policing and things like that. And I do believe that things are effective in helping to deal with crime as being part of a number of things that we can do to address that. So I do think we need to go back to having more police officers walking the beat, part of the community. So I think it depends on how we define police presence. Driving in a car, it's not enough.
Yeah. All right, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising right after this.